The wind rolled gently across the Normandy coastline, carrying with it the sound of waves breaking against the shore. The cliffs and beaches, once the stage of unimaginable tension, had long since turned quiet. Yet, in the late 1950s, when Dwight D. Eisenhower returned to these very sands, silence was heavy with memory. The Supreme Allied Commander of World War II, now President of the United States, stood where young men had once stepped into history. The beaches were no longer a battlefield, but their calmness concealed echoes of courage, sacrifice, and decisions that had changed the course of the 20th century. For Eisenhower, it was not just a diplomatic visit. It was a deeply personal encounter with the past. If stories like these capture your imagination, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Many more fascinating journeys through history are still ahead. Dwight David Eisenhower was born in 1890 in Denison, Texas, and raised in Abilene, Kansas, in a modest household that valued discipline and resilience. From an early age, Eisenhower displayed a balance of determination and humility. After entering the United States Military Academy at West Point, he developed into a capable officer with an analytical mind. Though he did not see combat during World War I, his years of service honed his organizational and leadership skills, preparing him for roles of greater responsibility. By the time the Second World War erupted, Eisenhower's career had already been marked by steady advancement. His ability to coordinate large, complex operations soon attracted the attention of General George C. Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff. Marshall saw in Eisenhower a rare combination: tactical knowledge, diplomatic tact, and a calm presence under pressure. These qualities would prove indispensable in the planning of the Allied invasion of Western Europe. In 1943 and 1944, as the Allies prepared to liberate Europe, Eisenhower was chosen as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. The responsibility placed upon him was immense: coordinating forces from multiple nations, managing personalities of prominent military leaders such as Bernard Montgomery and Omar Bradley, and keeping fragile alliances intact. Yet the greatest burden lay in deciding when and how to launch the largest amphibious invasion in history. Operation Overlord, as the plan was named, would send hundreds of thousands of soldiers across the English Channel. Eisenhower knew the risks intimately. A failed landing could result not only in catastrophic losses, but in a strategic disaster that might prolong the war indefinitely. On the night of June 5, 1944, after reviewing weather reports and consulting his commanders, Eisenhower gave the simple but momentous order: "Okay, let's go." Over a decade later, when Eisenhower returned to Normandy as the leader of a nation at peace, the decision of that night remained vivid in his memory. Standing on the beaches, he could not have escaped the contrast between past and present. Tourists and local residents strolled casually where once paratroopers had landed under fire, and where waves carried landing craft filled with soldiers from America, Britain, Canada, and other allied nations. The landscape looked deceptively ordinary. Villages rebuilt after the destruction of 1944 stood quietly among fields and hedgerows. Children played near monuments and memorials erected in honor of liberation. For the people of Normandy, Eisenhower's visit was more than ceremonial. To many French citizens, he represented not only the strategy that freed their homeland, but also the enduring bond between the United States and France. Those who observed Eisenhower during that journey noted the way he paused at certain spots along Omaha Beach and near the cliffs of Pointe. His gaze often lingered on the sea, as if the waves still carried with them the memories of young men he had once sent into battle. On the eve of D-Day, he had drafted a statement accepting responsibility if the invasion failed. That slip of paper, carried in his pocket, symbolized the immense weight of command. Now, years later, the beaches brought that weight back to the surface. One of the most moving aspects of Eisenhower's return was his meeting with those who had fought under his command. By the late 1950s, D-Day veterans were middle-aged men, many visiting Normandy for the first time since the war. Some stood alongside Eisenhower at memorials, their conversations blending official ceremony with personal remembrance. Soldiers recounted their experiences of landing under fire, of losing comrades, of the confusion and courage that marked June 6, 1944. For Eisenhower, these meetings were deeply sobering. He had always been known as a commander who respected the ordinary soldier. His leadership style valued clarity and fairness, and he often emphasized that victory depended not on generals, but on the courage of individual men. To face these veterans again, not as a wartime commander, but as a statesman, reminded him that history was not only written in strategies and communiques, but in the lived experiences of those who carried out the mission. Some veterans described their return with a sense of disbelief at how time had changed the landscape. Beaches that had once been scarred with craters and barbed wire were now calm, almost serene. Eisenhower listened quietly, occasionally nodding, sometimes asking a short question. His replies were brief, but the emotion in his expression conveyed more than words could. He was not there to relive the battle in detail. He was there to acknowledge the men who had made victory possible. The encounters also demonstrated the enduring sense of brotherhood among veterans. They walked together along the shoreline, sharing memories that were often unspoken yet understood. Eisenhower's presence gave those moments gravity, but he himself seemed less a president than a fellow witness to a turning point in history. For a man who bore the responsibility of sending thousands into danger, it was a return not only to a place but to the very heart of his leadership. Eisenhower's return to Normandy also carried broader significance. As president, he was leading the United States during the height of the Cold War. Europe, though liberated from Nazi occupation, was now divided between East and West. The memory of D-Day served as a reminder of unity among Western allies, and Eisenhower's presence in Normandy underscored that bond. For France, the ceremonies highlighted both gratitude and complexity. The memory of liberation was tied to national pride, but it also reminded many of the price paid in destruction. For the United States, Normandy stood as proof of the enduring value of alliance. In the nuclear age, when the risk of global conflict loomed, the symbolism of unity during World War II reinforced the necessity of cooperation in facing new challenges. Eisenhower himself had shaped much of this context. His presidency emphasized balance, containing threats without risking unnecessary escalation, strengthening alliances without neglecting domestic stability. Normandy became a symbolic stage where past sacrifices connected with present responsibilities. Eisenhower's emotional return was both personal and collective. The silence he observed on the beaches was matched by the solemn respect of crowds at memorials. The ceremonies were not grandiose. Instead, they carried the dignity of remembrance. Observers recalled his reflective mood, his words measured and deliberate. In those moments, Eisenhower bridged two identities: the wartime commander who had once borne the fate of Europe, and the statesman guiding a world still shaped by the war's aftermath. His presence in Normandy reminded all who witnessed it that history is not only preserved in archives and textbooks, but in landscapes, in memory, and in the lives of those who endured it. History does not vanish when the battles are over. It lingers in the landscapes where events unfolded, in the testimonies of those who lived through them, and in the lessons passed to new generations. Eisenhower's quiet reflections on the Normandy coast remind us that leadership is not measured solely by victory, but by the responsibility to remember and to preserve peace. For Eisenhower personally, the return may have also been a moment of reconciliation. He had lived with the consequences of his decisions for more than a decade. Seeing the beaches again, in a time of peace, perhaps offered him a form of closure. For the world, his presence was a visible reminder that leadership and responsibility extend beyond the moment of decision. They echo across decades. The beaches of Normandy are no longer guarded by soldiers, yet they remain guarded by memory, a duty entrusted to all who visit and to all who value the lessons of the past. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next journey into the past.